My team, kinda power. I love the power. I love the power.
Hi, and welcome to the Bigfooty Port Adelaide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to talking all things Port Adelaide. I'm Enviable Tradition. I'm here with my regular co-host, Macca. Welcome, mate.
G'day, buddy.
And we've got a first-timer here. We've got, not a first-timer on the Port board, but a first-timer on the podcast, Tribey. Welcome, mate.
Hi, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Tribey.
And so, obviously, a big week this week with the finals all happening. Port going down to Geelong by 16 points at the MCG. We're going to get into discussing all about that in just a short moment. But as we always do when we have a new podcaster on the show, Tribey, we're going to start with you, mate. And we want to know how you came to love this great football club and what your background is with the Port Adelaide Football Club.
Well, controversy, is that what you're aiming at? Or
You can be controversial if you like. That's okay.
Well-tilled soil. No, originally I was dragged across to Adelaide as part of a family of Collingwood supporters in 1984 or so. So naturally Port Adelaide was just the way to go. Obviously the working class, black and white. So that was naturally the banner everyone picked up. Then obviously, Scott Hodges and premierships, and obviously coming off the drought originally, it was a little bit poor. But then the club, I realised, was a winning club. It was a great club, and how could you like or love anyone else? So there you go.
Beautiful. So what are your first memories then? Like, what year did you start following the club? What were your early memories of following the club?
Oh, probably circa 1986. I grew up in the southern suburbs where everyone was either a Glenelg supporter or a Glenelg supporter. So obviously Glenelg were flying, and we used to get beaten a lot. And I actually didn't think Port were that good. And then obviously when 88, 89, 90, 92, just the premierships rolled in. I mean...
Yeah, you did time it pretty well there, Tribey.
Yeah, I did.
You didn't really have too long to wait, mate. I don't know about this drought you're talking about, but...
Yeah. Well, compared to recent years, I mean, it was just it was a cavalcade of success.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get into our talk for this week. And Macca, we might start with you, mate. Let's have your love and your hate for the week.
Sure thing, mate. My love is Phillip Walsh coming back. One of the absolute masterminds of our premiership and that minor premiership run from 02 to 04. All you got to do is listen to a number of the really strong best players in our history speak about the influence that he had over them. Guys like Tredrea, Corns, Burgoyne, Lay, they all speak, wonderful things about Phillip Walsh. So I'm so bloody excited we got him back after getting so close a couple of years ago. To have him back, I think this is one of the best appointments we've had in a long time.
Beautiful. And we'll talk in a bit more detail about that later on, and Rennie heading out the door as well. But what was your hate for the week, mate?
Just the season being over. It was just such an enjoyable year. It's just a bit of a sad panda at the moment. It's a bit down. There's no game this week. Don't really care what happens for the rest of the year, to be honest. But, it's just been such a fantastic year. And, just a little bit of a shame that there wasn't another chapter to be told. Yeah.
And so, Tribey, what was your love, mate?
My love was just anything to do with the Port Adelaide Football Club, from the players to the coaching staff to the fans to just everyone who was able to, after the last 5 years of just a wasteland of wilderness, we were able to just come out and just enjoy footy again. And, although the players change and the coaches change, you still love the club. Win, lose or draw, but this year felt like vindication and that we're finally back on track.
Beautiful. And I know your hate this week, mate, has been a popular one on this podcast show, so maybe you'd like to jump in and give us your hate for the week.
Look, I'm actually going to do an about-face on Shane McInerney. He's probably a great bloke. He probably drinks similar beer to me. He probably dresses in a similar manner, But so I'm going to move away from that, and I'm just going to say I hate Geelong. I mean, this last 10 or 11 games where they've just murdered us in every single way. Now I know how it feels to be a South or a Glenelg supporter in September. Just that one club that comes up, and even when you think you're travelling well against them, they just grab up, and at halftime and we're 4 goals up, I defy any Port Adelaide supporter to think that they weren't going to come at us hard. And they just, hey, take nothing away from them. They're a fabulous club, and we've got to look up to them. We're lucky to have Hinkley from that system, but yeah, Geelong, just go away, Geelong. Just stay like you're supposed to, boys.
Yeah, well, my love this week was really just once again the team not giving up. You know, it's once again, it's just so good to see after the last couple of years we've been through that, you know, even when the chips were down, even right at the end when it really looked like we were out of the game, they just came again one more time. You know, there was that magnificent goal from Justin Westhoff, and you know they really did just not give up the entire season, and it was just fantastic to see. And you know, as a supporter, really that's all you can ask for, and you see that and you feel happy and you think, hey, this is a team I can follow. This is a group of lads I can get behind and yell and cheer for, because you just know they're going to give their all. So I just love that about that particular game, but really about the whole season. I think they set that tone at the start, and they've certainly lived up to it throughout the season, which is fantastic. My hate for the week, actually, you know, you mentioned the umpires there, Tribey, and I was actually really disappointed that for the first time all season, Ken Hinkley actually made comment about the umpires after the game. And I was actually disappointed about that. I know a lot of the fans, I know I've spoken to a few people who said, no, they were really happy that he did it because they were annoyed with the umpiring and something should be said. But I kind of felt like we had this theme of the whole year of saying, well, you get what you deserve and you work for it, and if you're good enough, you'll get there. And then right at the end of the season, when we'd done all that great work, he sort of came out and said, yeah, but, you know, the umpires were, I think he said confusing, I think is what he said, but probably meant, you know, implied other stuff as well. And I just thought, I was actually disappointed with that. I thought it would have been good just to go away and say, no, do you know what, we weren't good enough. Next year we're going to come back, we're going to work harder and completely, you know, focus on what we can control. And so I was actually just a little bit disappointed in that. Not obviously loved Kenny this year, he's done an amazing job, but there was probably just one little thing I thought, oh, I don't know if I would have said that. So that was my hate for the week. So,
that's understandable, but I just think, in fairness to Ken, I don't think he quite expected the right in front of me moment of the Carlisle Corey decision was just horrendous, and everyone who I watched it with just expected the umpire to point our way, and the look on Carlisle's face, it just unfortunately seemed to ripple through the rest of the team that you know, the interpretations had changed, and it was going to be hard from now on.
Yeah. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I don't think it was a brilliant job from the umpiring. But I would have liked to see Ken stick with his theme the whole year. I reckon it would have been good.
We got the power to win, power to roll, come on. Port Adelaide aggression, we are the power from...
Macca, perhaps you can jump in, mate. We're going to move on from the umpires now. We're going to move on to your review of the game. Obviously, we played Geelong, gave him a really good shake, but went down by 16 points at the end. Do you want to talk to us a bit about what went on?
Yeah, sure. We did give them a really good shake. You know, I'm so proud of the lads in how they played. Not just how they played, but how they went about it. You know, they weren't prepared to be bossed around by Geelong this time. And even though we had a big sort of third quarter breakdown, I thought, you know, for the other three quarters, we put in a bloody good effort and nearly came away with the win. I mean, such a strong opening half. I mean, who would have thought we'd be 4 goals up at half-time against Geelong at the MCG in a final? I mean, that was beyond my wildest expectations.
It was pinch yourself kind of stuff, wasn't it? Like, you were sitting there going, really? Are we really up?
Are we really up by 4 goals against Geelong? I mean...
Yep,
we are. Yeah, that's it. I don't know. I guess, you know, when they kicked the first 2 goals, you sort of thought, oh, here we go again. You know, we're going to be bloody 7 goals down at quarter time or something. But... you know, then we really controlled the game for the next sort of 45 minutes and did such a good job. You know, lots of gut running. I know it's been a theme on the podcast, especially with Ebert and his gut running, but guys like Monfries and Gray and Moore and, you know, Brody and especially Cameron O'Shea. I mean, he is Chad Corns-like at the moment.
That's the name I was about to mention. Definitely his gut running and just his all-round effort was amazing. Just
an incredible footballer that he's turned into. I mean, I'm so excited about his career and where he's headed next year and beyond. And we were 4 goals up at half time, and I don't know, I was so excited. I was jumping around like an idiot at half time, just hoping that, you know, in the back of my mind there was always that thought of, God, you know, probably about 7 or 8 times this year we've come out after half time and just put in such a lame effort.
Yeah. Well, let's stop on that point for a sec, Macca, because I actually want to find out from all three of you. You sort of covered that there, Macca. What you thought at half time? Like, where did you think the game was going to go in the second half?
I had my fingers crossed that we would come out, and my expectation was all I want is for us to still be in front, and, you know, best case scenario is that we are still 4 goals up at 3/4 time. I thought if we can keep that margin, our better legs, our better fitness will hold us in good stead in the last quarter when Geelong come back. But yeah, they came back a quarter early.
And Tribey, what were your thoughts at halftime, mate?
Mine was actually far more simplistic. Like, I was actually, to be brutally honest, I was in the ensuite having a halftime slash, and all I could think of was we're 4 goals up. If we can get the first goal of the third quarter to stretch it out to 5, it'll give us the belief, it'll give us that little kick we need. But unfortunately, there was just something about the Geelong, there was something about the occasion. I just thought, we cannot have the sort of performance we had in the first quarter, first and second quarter, all our own way, without Geelong eventually coming back. And did they? They just steamrolled us in that third quarter.
Yeah, because I've got to admit, I mean, you guys obviously heard my pre-match predictions, so I was still pretty circumspect at halftime. Like, I was still sitting there thinking, we've done so well, we're 4 goals up, it's pretty much all gone perfectly for us so far. I thought, if we can manage to maintain that for the entire game, we might just be able to keep our noses in front. But I just had this feeling there was going to be a stage, and it seems to have been the third quarter a lot this year, where we just weren't quite going to keep our pedal to the metal, weren't quite going to keep that same pressure on, and they were just going to, just be too good, unfortunately, too experienced. Once again, you kind of come back to the way the old Port Magpies used to do it to all the other SANFL teams, basically. They just had that finals experience, they had that finals know-how, where they just knew, if they just persisted, they'd get through you and get over the line. And I think that's kind of what Geelong did to us. So I was sort of sitting there thinking, gee, this is awesome. Like, we were in with a real chance here. But in the back of my head, I was thinking, I don't know if we can hang on. Anyway, go on, Macca. I was just curious to hear what people's thoughts were at halftime.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was similar, praying for the first goal. If we get the first goal, we will win the game. That's what I said to a couple of Bigfooty lads at the ground during the halftime break. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. I mean, Geelong, I think it was about 30 seconds in when Hawkins scored, and you just felt, here we go. Got to get the next one. Bang, straight away they get their second goal. Bang, straight away they get their third goal. There goes the halftime break. There goes the lead. Going back on. I'm not sure. I really don't know what it is about our third quarters this year, because it's happened so many times, almost on a weekly basis during the second half of the year. I know it was the first quarters during the first half, but ever since the Dogs game, just before the break, when they came out and kicked about 7 goals to 1 or something like that, we've just not been able to compete after half time in the third quarter.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, because it was early in the year, it was the start of the game, and so it seems like we come out from either the start of the game or from the main break just not quite switched on, and I just don't see how that can be happening on such a consistent basis.
Well, it's just a complete breakdown. I mean, it's just, we don't win the ruck, and the midfield just completely disappears. We lose every single clearance, every single stoppage. Our defenders are behind the ball. They're not getting their spoils in, so we throw a couple of men behind the ball. They're not in the correct position. When we happen to do actually win the ball, we've got no one to kick it to up forward, so the ball just comes straight back out again. And it's just happened so many times. I mean, you look at the showdown, and even against like Gold Coast and Geelong again. Just not sure what it is, but I really thought that Jay Schultz's goal near the end of the third quarter was going to be important, just to keep us in touch. I think it was about 7 points the difference at 3/4 time, and I thought, we've shown that we've got such good fitness this year. We know we're not going to give up. We know we're going to put everything into this last quarter. And I really was disappointed with the umpiring in the last quarter, but I mean, as you said, you get what you deserve, and going on the third quarter, we didn't deserve to win the game.
Yeah, and I think that was the story in the end, wasn't it? It was that third quarter. I know you were at the game, but on the TV at one stage, I know it flashed up that it was 15-1 inside 50s at about halfway through, I think, that third quarter. You
don't deserve to win a final if you kick, one scoring shot to about 15 in the third quarter of a final. You don't really deserve to win.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's what it was in the end. I think it was just that consistency. And I know we spoke about it before the game, and we said, they're a young team. They still haven't quite got that four-quarter consistency yet. They don't seem to be able to maintain that level of performance across a whole game, or indeed across a whole season yet. But I think that's going to come. But, I think the most pleasing thing from my perspective was that we didn't fade away at all come finals time. We didn't we almost stepped up a notch when we got to the finals in both of the games, I thought, in terms of consistency of performance, in terms of players stepping up, in terms of players showing that they really wanted to, perform on the big stage and perform on the big occasion. I thought it was really pleasing to see for a young team that, we really took it to two really good teams and obviously knocked one of them off, pushed the other one right to the end. And it was pretty pleasing to see from such a young team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone expected us to get thrashed against Collingwood and we beat them, and everyone expected us to get thrashed against Geelong and we were up by 4 goals at half time. So, I mean, there's great signs for the future. We just got to make sure we bottle that and get hungry again and do the right things in the pre-season and improve the list, and improve our fitness and improve our midfield structures and all that sort of thing, and go for gold next year.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to talk about that a lot on the podcast show next week. We're going to do a whole review of the season, of sort of what went right and what went wrong. So everyone can sort of look forward to that next week, and we'll get right into that. But Tribey, what were your thoughts on the game, mate?
Am I allowed to speak candidly, or this is a G-rated program, isn't it? Yeah, look, I vacillated from disbelief that we were doing so well in the first half to hold Geelong. So what did they kick to half time? 3 goals, 6 or something?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, for us to just be... It was almost too good to be true. We seemed to be cruising almost in the last part of the second quarter, and then obviously the third quarter, when Geelong, the inevitable tidal wave came, what really frustrated me was we didn't seem to be completely outclassed. It's just we just seemed to have that split second of slowness, or that split second of indecision that Geelong had, So there was a moment when Bartel kicked that goal on the run where Broadbent did a really good defensive effort and he tried to kick it to Boak, and Corey just stepped in with a split second mark and hand off to Bartel, who then goaled. And you just think to yourself, this is the sort of execution and level. I mean, it's not luck. It can't be just luck that they do this to Hawthorn, they do this to us, they do this to Collingwood, they do it to teams again and again and again, and this is the level we want to reach if we're to win another premiership. And I think it will absolutely bode well for this group that they did perform extraordinarily well on the MCG when they weren't expected to.
Yeah.
And at a risk of sounding like someone from Carlton, we are coming, and I'm pretty sure a few people know it too.
At least we went with "We are coming" rather than "Can you smell what we're cooking?" Because that was a particularly bad motto. So that was a shocker. So yeah, and I think it's right. It was just that slight difference, wasn't it? Like you could just tell they just had that little bit more execution. They had that little bit more experience. They had those little bit bigger bodies. But gee, isn't that a great thing for our team to come up against them and say, we were that close. We were that close. All we've got to do next year is find that extra 5%, that extra 10%. We're not talking monumental changes now. We're just talking that little bit extra we've got to find. And I think, we're going to talk later about the changes in the coaches. But, with Burgess on board for a second pre-season, with the team getting that extra year older, it's not hard to see how we can find that extra little percent to really take it to those top teams.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be really exciting. So how about we start talking about some of our best players for the game? Who'd you guys like?
Boakey. After a down week against Collingwood, I thought he really came to play and led from the front against Geelong. Did everything he could to help us over the line. Thought Trengove had a ripping game on Port Adelaide. He's someone that's almost consistently killed us over the last few years. So him keeping him to something like 1 kick was a fantastic effort. I brought up Cameron O'Shea earlier. He's just such a good player now. He's probably the best in that position in the league at the moment. That sort of third tall, chopping in front of the pack and taking a mark and running off. I mean, it is Chad Corns-like, and I'm just so excited to see what he can do in the future. I thought Brad Ebert's effort, once again, he was probably our best player throughout the finals. And Westhoff, it was great to see him really stand up in a final, and I mean that goal at the end there was just ridiculous.
Yeah, it was a great goal, wasn't it? That was just amazing. I mean, it's so ridiculous that the goal of the year is passed and it's not eligible to be in it, but it should have won at Macca. It was just fantastic, and what a moment in the game to do it. Just when it looked like it was all dead and buried, all of a sudden this little spark just to reignite again was pretty exciting. So
that's it.
Tribey, who'd you like in the game, mate?
Without wanting to double up on Macca's summary there, I'm going to say Jay Schultz, actually. I just thought it was another typical game where Jay Schultz was under the pump. He was facing 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s, the emptied out forward line when we struggle and we're facing an onslaught from the opposition. And he just kept on presenting. He kept on trying. He kicked 1 or 2 goals when the game was really hot after being quite quiet. And also, I'm not sure whether he injured himself. There was a moment when he fell forward onto his hands, and it just looked like he either jerked or dislocated his shoulder at one point. And I thought, oh no, that looks absolutely terrible. But to come back on and keep on battling, and without wanting to harp back on certain decisions again, I did think he probably could have got an important goal late on when Lonergan just absolutely threw him out of the contest 1-on-1, and it was deemed to be play on. But yeah, I mean, apart from Jay Schultz battling, I really liked, and I am going to double up, Cameron O'Shea. I think for someone who is so maligned, he is just an absolute stud of a player. He's big, he's quick, he can read the play really well, he runs lines, he's got a quite underrated disposal, and I think when he really begins to back himself and realises just how good he is, both talent-wise and physically, he is just going to be one of the elite players of the competition.
Yeah, and he was probably my best too. I thought O'Shea was just fantastic, and everything you guys have said was absolutely true. And, I think he's one that should be really looking to push for that All-Australian selection next year. We'll talk about the All-Australians a bit later, but I think he should definitely be pushing for that All-Australian next year. Like he should be looking to get that spot probably that Mackie had this year. And I think, on the form he showed, particularly towards the end of the season, there's absolutely no reason why he can't come into that spot because he just played some absolutely fantastic defensive and attacking football, playing tall, running, he really just did a lot and it was fantastic. And Macca, I think you were spot on with really our leaders, Boak, Trengove and Ebert, probably, not just in this game, but in throughout the finals and throughout even just the latter part of the year. I thought those were the three who really stepped up and really showed leadership and really performed when the chips were down against the quality opposition, when the heat was on. I thought those three were absolutely fantastic. I think Trengove's last month has probably been by far the best footy he's played for the club. I've always been a big rap for him.
Yep.
But he's just stepped up to that next level to sort of start playing the footy we've always known he was capable of and find that really good mix between, that aggression but also playing good footy, being sound defensively, giving a little bit on the offensive side as well. And I reckon he's just been absolutely fantastic and pretty undersold, I reckon, in the last month. You haven't heard a lot about him in the media or anything like that, but I think his footy's just been fantastic. So,
exactly, yeah. I mean, he's kept his 2 opponents to something like 3 kicks total in the 2 finals. I mean, that's unbelievable,
isn't
incredible.
it? Yeah. So who'd you like from the young guys? Obviously, we've all mentioned Cam O'Shea, and he probably still classifies as a young guy. But who else do we like for the young players?
Probably, without being too harsh, no one else, to be honest. It was just one of those games where, Wingard was a little bit below par. Moore made a few mistakes. Ollie Wines, I liked his game, even though he didn't get much of it. Cahoon was okay. Actually, I really thought Jasper Pittard's first half was outstanding. He was someone that I wanted to note. He fell away pretty dramatically after half time, but his first half was probably the best half of football he's played all year, in my opinion.
I'm shocked, Macca. I'm shocked. I've just got to recover a little bit. Yeah, no, I reckon you're right there, mate. Absolutely. And Tribey, who'd you like?
Jasper Pittard. If he had been able to get that disposal away, obviously he was pinged for illegal disposal or holding the ball or something along those lines. I couldn't tell. I was so angry.
Is that still a rule?
I think it is. It wasn't for most of the finals, and then all of a sudden it's back in vogue, fashionable. If Pittard had been able to get that shot in, and we had been able to conjure a shot at goal to get back within, 4 points with about 80 or 90 seconds to go, I don't know. I personally probably would have penned a song about Jasper Pittard. So, hopefully he can go on with it and build on it and keep on impressing us for longer.
Yeah, and I thought Wines and Moore, were probably the two of the better younger guys. Both playing a really tough role against a pretty seasoned Geelong team with some pretty seasoned, tough bodies in there. And for two young guys like that to be standing up on the inside, like you said, not getting a huge amount of the ball, perhaps making a couple of mistakes, but to be standing up like they did on the inside against quality opposition, I thought they both did a good job, and I think they're both going to be definitely players, obviously for the future. But even just next season, I think those two are going to be two players who are really going to be our solid, probably finals footballers. Those solid bodies who get in and under, who win the ball, who distribute it out. You need those sort of players in the big finals getting their hand on the ball first. And I thought both of them showed some real signs that they're going to be those players for us in the future.
Well, this is where Phillip Walsh comes in, I think. Really excited to see what he can do with Andrew Moore next year.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into that now. We had that scheduled for a bit later, but let's jump in and talk about the coaching changes. So obviously Rennie out and Walsh in. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Perhaps you go first, Tribey.
Hey, look, if you're a long-time reader of the Port Board, I have been an absolute Walsh booster, if you will, to borrow an American term. I just think his reputation and his ability in terms of stoppages, in terms of getting the most out of young midfielders. I mean, Kane Corns, Chad Corns, Sean Burgoyne, Dom Cassisi, they all unreservedly rave about the influence that Phil Walsh had on their careers growing up. And I just think if he can come back in that midfield role and get a hold of Ollie Wines, get a hold of Hamish Hartlett, Chad Wingard, Andrew Moore, even guys like Brad Ebert and Travis Boak, who've still got a lot to learn and I think still have a lot of improvement left in their football. I mean, if he can really get through to them like obviously Walsh did to the aforementioned guys from the bygone era, I mean, we have got a lot to look forward to at stoppages.
Yeah, absolutely. And Macca, obviously you're a big rap mate, so tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add than that. I mean, as Tribey says, all our fantastic players in our history who were underneath him absolutely rave about him. I mean, what more can you say? I mean, I think Ren's done an okay job. I'm not going to badmouth him because I think he's come in at a pretty tricky time a few years back and done a pretty good job, and our midfield's been really, really good this year. But I think Walsh is going to take it up to that next level where we could really have a top 2 or 3 midfield in the league.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with the calibre of players we're talking about, and we're obviously talking Walshy up. So, with those sort of players obviously singing his praises, you've got to be pretty excited about what he can bring to the club. Obviously, there's been a number of mentions about the ruck role, obviously. Seemingly the rucks have come on a long way this year. And how much Ren was involved in that, obviously from the outside, is pretty hard to know. But you look at it from the outside and think, gee, well, you've had a pretty darn good ruckman in Rennie there, being able to obviously coach and mentor the likes of Lobby and Redden. And obviously Lobby in particular has come on a long way this year and has been playing some fantastic football. So you just kind of hope that either there's someone else there in the wings who's going to come in and take over that ruck coaching role, or perhaps it wasn't Ren who was responsible for all that improvement anyway. But that's probably the only concern, I guess, there is that we're losing that kind of specialist ruck advice for these two, still very young ruckmen who are developing and coming through. I'm sure the club know what they're doing and have got that covered, but that's probably the only one little concern, I guess, you see there.
Yeah, I mean, the season's been over for us for 6 days, so, I mean, there's plenty of time to find a specific, specialist ruck coach and try and find the right one, the right fit for our club, I think. So I've got no doubt that we'll find someone to do that role. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. And so moving on, obviously we'd like to review the SANFL power plays. Obviously no Maggie's game this week, unfortunately not playing in the finals. But obviously the SANFL power players, the standout this week, obviously Matty Thomas winning the Magarey Medal. What are your thoughts on that, guys?
Oh, good on him. He's a very much maligned figure on our board, Matty Thomas, but good on him for winning the Magarey. At SANFL level, he picks up heaps of the bowl. He uses it pretty well. He's in and under. He's a real leader at SANFL level. In terms of AFL, it just hasn't worked out for him at Port Adelaide. I think my theory in terms of AFL midfielders is that there's kind of 3 components that you need to have. I think the first one is speed, the second one is ball winning ability, and the third one is disposal efficiency. Obviously, there's not many people in the league that have all 3. I mean, probably only Ablett, to be honest. There's heaps that have 2 out of 3 of them. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of slow elite players. You look at Watson and Mitchell and Barlow, all those type of guys. Plenty of people have 1, but I don't think Matt Thomas has any of those 3. He's pretty slow. He's only a 15 to 18 disposal winner, and he's not very clean with the ball at AFL level.
Yeah.
He's had plenty of chances. He hasn't quite made it. You know, he's been a popular figure. I used to love him. And I really wish him well for the future. You know, it seems obvious that he's going to get another crack elsewhere. And hopefully he can play another 40 or 50 games for another club.
And how do you think he'll go, Macca?
I think he'll probably do as well as he did at Port. You know, he'll be that sort of... He'll get a bit of the ball. He'll have the odd game, you know, once every 6 weeks where he's best on ground, and that'll be about it, I think.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Tribey?
Shout out to both Big Matty T's, the real Matt Thomas, and of course Big Matty T from the Foreboard, who I've had running before. No, look, Matt Thomas is a fabulous story. I mean, we remember back to when he was a lot younger and he almost died. He had that surgical complication where his dad found him in the shower at 3 a.m, and he had all sorts of things wrong with him. And I mean, to battle back and to play solid football at both SANFL and to a lesser extent AFL football is a fabulous achievement. But, you know, I think we can't get too emotional and tied to the individuals. Like, I think we fell into that trap, sort of like Freo in the late 90s, where they had all these cult heroes like Jason Norrish and James Walker was another one. These guys from Freo who would come up and we'd play them and we'd always belt them. And you'd look at their team sheet and think, well, Troy Cook, no wonder we beat them, you know? And then eventually they began to churn through their list and they got rid of these guys, and, you know, Freo gradually became a really good side. And I think this 2013, as much as I'm sad to see guys like Nick Salter go, I think this, and Brett Ebert as well, I think this is a really good sign that we're finally moving forward and really, you know, this is the new Port. You know, we're going to churn through our list, we're going to get the best coaches, and we're going to try and win a lot of football games.
Yeah, and probably a sign that we've got a whole lot more depth there as well, you know, that we don't actually need to hang on to the Matt Thomases. And you know, I would just want to agree that I think Matty's been a great player for our club. He's really given his all. You know, you've never seen him come into the team and thought, gee, he's not really trying. You know, he's always given his all when he's got there. He may have fallen short at times in terms of execution or disposal efficiency or, you know, whatever else was there. But, you know, he really has been, I think, a good club man. You know, he's battled with quite a few injuries and played with quite a few injuries over the years, from what I understand. And so for him to sort of work through that and to be the consistent performer he was, provide that depth, you know, come into the team when he was needed, you know, go back to the SNFL, he wouldn't sulk, he wouldn't complain, he'd go back, he'd play good footy, he'd earn his way back into the team. And, you know, you can have nothing but respect for that sort of player. And, you know, my hope is that he'll go to another club and perhaps be that sort of, you know, Tom Logan that's been at Port, you know, the kind of player who, you know, provides good culture, sets good standards on the training track, keeps the pressure on the senior players. You know, I don't think he's ever going to be a best 18 sort of player, but he's going to be that player who carves out a pretty darn good career, probably ends up playing quite a few games, by just being that good club man who gives it all, who puts in, you know, the whole time.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Can't agree more.
I think moving on, let's have a look at obviously the other big news this week was the All-Australian team, and obviously for Port having two blokes in the All-Australian team is a big improvement on what we've seen on previous years. And so what were your thoughts, perhaps Tribey, we might start with you this time, mate. What were your thoughts on Boakey and Wingard getting in?
Look, I watched the coverage live on Fox Footy Channel, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I fist bumped myself numerous times. When the picture of Chad came up, and the instant Kieran Jack was named on the half-forward flank, I thought, well, hang on a minute, maybe Chad's missed. But the minute Chad was named in the forward pocket, I thought, hang on a minute, it's going to be one of these years where they sandwich 100 midfielders into the team, and I thought Boak would be a chance. And lo and behold, when Boak's face came up on the interchange, I was wrapped. I thought, here's a guy who turned his back on, you know, going back home. He turned his back on Geelong. You know, he embraced being captain of the Port Adelaide Football Club, and has just improved in leaps and bounds. I've met him a couple of times. He's just a lovely fella. He's a straight down the line fella, and you know, what more can you say about the way he's played this year? You know, he's always been that heavy lifter in the midfield, but this year he became a game breaker and a match winner. And I think, you know, there couldn't be a more deserved selection from Port Adelaide, I think, than Travis Boak.
Yeah, what do you think, Macca? Obviously pretty happy with that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it was pretty obvious from about, I don't know, maybe 60% through the year that Wingard was going to get in, because he just kept on performing week after week, kicking goals and getting, just racking up the disposals. But the thing with sort of elite midfielders and guys like Boki is often that those guys that have really, really good years often miss out. And I was absolutely stoked that he got in, because he has had probably the best captain's year of anybody else in the league this year. And he's probably had the best captain's season that I can remember anybody that's captain Port Adelaide having since I've been alive. Definitely up there with guys like Russell Johnston's, 1990, guys like Tim Ginniver's 94, even Tredray's sort of 04 if you want to count that as well, or Primus's
we're counting.
02.
We are absolutely counting that, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I think Boki's been just as good. I mean, you've just got to look at the games where, he got us back into them. All these comebacks this year that we had, the 7 or 8 come from behind victories. He was the number one key player in about 6 or 7 of them. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and I was kind of the same. I thought Wingard was a no-brainer, and I thought, the way he stood up, and it wasn't just the number of possessions he got. It just wasn't just the stuff he did on the field, but it was when he did it on the field as well. The amount of times he stepped up in those clutch situations, kicked the crucial goal, stood up in the big moments of the big games. I thought it was just impossible to ignore this year. I thought it was actually probably a sign of, there's been a lot of talk this year about us regaining relevance as a football club. And I actually thought the fact that Boki actually got into the All-Australian was probably a sign of us regaining some relevance as a football club. I thought, I reckon in other years he could have had that sort of a year and just not gotten in. They would have found a couple of other midfielders to slot into that slot. But I think with Port being the story it was this year, with the success of the team, with how deep we went into the finals, I think they just kind of looked at it and thought, well, we can't only have, we've got to have a couple of players in here. And they actually looked a bit more closely at the Port list. And once again, I'm not saying that it wasn't deserved at all, because it absolutely was deserved, but I just feel like, in other years, maybe he would have been overlooked for one of the other sort of higher profile, bigger name midfielders. And I thought it was just a great sign for Port that we're starting to get that recognition across the league and getting recognised with things like All-Australian awards. So I was pretty happy to see, absolutely stoked to see Boki there, actually. I didn't think he was going to get there, so I was really happy to see him get named.
Yeah, I don't want to undersell Wingard either, because that's just a phenomenal story. He was pretty good last year in his first year. He looked a little bit undersized even at the start of this year. He still looks like a kid. And to come in second year, 43 goals and 22 touches a game for a 19, 20-year-old. I mean, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. I think he's the youngest All-Australian since Gavin Wanganeen and Ben Hart in 92. I believe. Yeah,
pretty exciting when you start hearing him get named with Wanganeen, isn't it? Like, it's as soon as you hear that, it's happened a couple of times in his career already. But you look at that career trajectory, and I think Wanganeen was Magarey the year after. Brownlow the year after. You think, wow, that sort of trajectory. You like those sort of stories without wanting to sound like Brendan Sanderson. But it's pretty exciting. I think the trajectory is going on. So we will move on. The last topic we've got is obviously the changes to our list. We had some a retiree and some delistings. So Nathan Bleed, Nick Salter, Daniel Stewart, Matty Thomas, Danny Butcher, Justin Hoskin, Darren Pfeiffer, and of course Brett Ebert retiring. What were your thoughts on those guys? Any of those that stood out for you that you were particularly pleased with, particularly disappointed with? What were your thoughts, Macca?
I think it was pretty cut and dry, really. I mean, Thomas it was obvious that he was going to go, and I think he wants to leave anyway. Salter hadn't played a game in 2 years, so it was pretty clear that he was going to go. Still a bit disappointed about him. He looked really good as a forward, and I think Dean Laidley pretty much screwed his career around a bit. Daniel Stewart, I mean, just unfulfilled potential with him. Physically, contested marks, quick off the mark, but he just lacked that. He was just too laconic in games and too inconsistent. Blee's the one I'm a little bit disappointed with. I can sort of understand why they've got rid of him. I think he's had such a good year. I mean, I'm just not sure what else he could have done to stay on the list, really. I think he's probably just a bit of a victim of circumstance in that we've got so many of those, quasi top third tall defenders, and he's probably bottom of the list, so he's had to go. Ebert, obviously, he's been a fantastic player for our club. Sad to see him retire on that note. And the three rookies, I mean, there's no real surprises there. Butcher just couldn't get the ball. Hoskin had a great start to the year, but fell away pretty dramatically. And Pfeiffer, a bit of a cult hero last year, but yeah, he looked miles off this year.
Yeah. And Tribey, anyone there you're disappointed about or pleased about?
Pretty much everyone on the list I assume would go. Even my personal favourite insulter, who I look at a guy like Stuart Cramery at Essendon, and he's talked about as this potential, 191, 190 centimetre forward who could be the answer to the Western Bulldogs' woes, or GWS are after him. And I think, you look at what Nick Salter brings to the table with his aggression, his leading, his marking, his beautiful long kick, and he's so aggressive on the ground. You remember that win we had against Hawthorn in 2009 or 2010 at Football Park, where Salter got right into the Hawthorn players and sparked a melee, He just seemed like the kind of player who you look at him on paper and you just think everything should work and he should sit on a half-forward flank and play 200 games, but he just never seemed to get it together, from being pigeonholed as a defender to then suffering with injury later in his career. Feel really sorry to see him go, but apart from that, I agree with Macca. I thought that Nathan Blee probably deserved another year as that tall midfielder / third defender. I thought he was really showing signs and had played really well for North Adelaide all year.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I was actually pretty happy with all of them. I mean, even Blee, I've looked at Blee, I've watched him play a few times, and he just strikes me as one of those kind of tweeners. Like, he's sort of in between everything. Like, he's a bit of a defender, like he's a bit of a small defender, he's a bit of a tall defender, he's a bit of a midfielder. I just didn't feel like he had any one role that he could come in and play at AFL level. And he strikes me as the kind of player who's going to be a really, really good, SANFL waffle player, but not quite going to cut it when we start stepping up to the AFL level. To a certain degree, I think Nick Salter was a little bit the same, and that's pretty harsh on Nick because he did play some good footy early on. But I think the fact that we're going back to talking about 2009, 2010 when we're looking for highlights of Nick Salter probably says it all. That he just never quite managed to solidify his spot in the team, whether that was the position he played, the injuries he had, the chances he got. But he just never quite was able to step up to that next level and really dominate. As you said, Daniel Stewart was probably the most disappointing one on that list, just because he had all the tools. Like, you'd watch him play and you'd see glimpses there where you'd see this great high, mark where he'd take the ball right at the top of the mark and you'd think, gee, there's something there. Or you'd see him kick a beautiful goal, or you'd see some of that agility, that ability to take the ball below his knees, and you'd think, gee, this guy's really got something here. But it was just so rare. It was so few and far between, and just not enough aggression, I think, was probably the biggest thing missing for him. That real oomph and that real hard edge just didn't seem to be there. So he's probably the most disappointing one, I think, but he seemed to have it all.
There was an SANFL final that he played in, I think 2009, I think it was, for North Adelaide against Woodville West Torrens. And he had something ridiculous, like 26 touches, 15 marks and 4 goals, and he looked like the second coming of Nick Riewoldt. He was just super quick off the mark. He was taking grabs, he was taking contested marks, kicking goals. He had a similar game against Richmond in the last game a few years back, but he just never went on with it.
No, it was disappointing. And the other one that was probably disappointing for me was actually Justin Hoskin. I thought we seemed to trial quite a few of those Maggie's boys at the end of last year, and I would have really liked to have seen probably Corey Beard or Raikuwaza have a bit of a crack, even Gray have a bit of a crack in the power team. I just didn't think Justin Hoskin was the right choice out of those train-on players that we had, out of those Maggie's boys. I just wasn't sure he was the right one to pick up and give a crack, and so I was a bit disappointed on that front. I still think Corey Beard would be a good player for us to pick up if we're looking for that little bit of extra depth in some of those taller stocks. He's just a good footballer.
Yeah, I think the problem with Corey Beard is that he's another 192 centimetre defender. And we just got rid of 191 centimetre Nathan Blee. So that's probably...
he does seem to play a bit taller than Blee, though. I think some players at 190 centimetres play shorter. Some of them play taller, and I think Blee definitely seems one of those ones that does play shorter. Whereas I think Corey does play that little bit taller. But anyway, I think we're getting off topic there. Probably what we should finish off with, I think, is just a bit of a tribute to Brett Ebert. What a player he's been for the club. He has been pigeonholed as that small or sometimes tall forward his whole career. And I think a lot of us would have liked to have seen him given different roles, perhaps up on the wing or in the midfield or even off the half-back flank to use that leg of his. But you've got to say he's had a great career for the Port Adelaide Football Club. You know, if it wasn't for his last name and the obvious comparisons to some of his other family members, then you know, he'd be seen in an even better light, I think. But you know, some of those years he had, you know, you think back to 2007, the goals he was kicking, the marks he was taking in the forward line. You know, what a quality player and what a great career, what a great club man he's been over the years. I think it's just worth giving a massive shout out to Brett and saying, you know, thanks for everything.
Yeah, great player. Great player, a great story. I got to play against him a couple of times in primary school. He was playing about 3 or 4 years above his grade. That's how good he was back then.
Yeah.
You know, I got to see him through the SANFL reserves, and then, you know, that fantastic year he had at SANFL level in 2003, and just the excitement. He's probably, I can't think of another player whose debut has been so
Anticipated,
yeah, just in amongst all the Port supporters. I mean, we were just willing him to get a game that year. It didn't happen. He won the Magarey, fantastic, and he's had a really good career. So good on him.
Yeah. And it's probably fair to say, you know, Brett's probably got a bit more time on his hands. I think there's only one thing that all Port supporters want him to be doing, and I'm sure he can figure out what that is. So keep that even name alive and running in the Port Footy Club. I think it'd be a great thing. So we might just leave it at that before it gets too dirty and move on. But as I said, next week we're going to have a big season review on the Port Big Footy podcast. So really looking forward to that. And so until next week, once again, go the power.
Go on, boys.
Thanks, guys.